A black boy helps a woman carry heavy bags in the rain, but the next morning, a jet lands in his neighborhood and changes everything. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The rain pounded against the cracked window of the small apartment, each drop an ominous reminder of the storm that had been brewing both outside and within Jamal's life. The 12-year-old boy sat on the edge of his bed, watching his grandmother Rachel sleep fitfully, her chest rising and falling with labored breaths. The wheezing sound that accompanied each intake of air had grown worse over the past week. Jamal's fingers traced the edges of the final notice from the electric company. The bold red letters spelling "Disconnection Notice" seemed to pulse in his hands. 3 days. That's all they had left before the power would be cut, taking with it the small oxygen machine that helped his grandmother breathe at night. He slipped quietly into the kitchen, careful not to wake Rachel. The apartment was barely large enough for 2 people, one small bedroom, a bathroom with perpetually leaking pipes, and a kitchen with just enough space for a wobbly table and 2 mismatched chairs. The wallpaper, once vibrant with floral patterns, now peeled at the edges, revealing patches of mold beneath. Emptying his pockets, Jamal laid out his meager savings on the worn tabletop. Crumpled bills and tarnished coins formed small piles as he counted them meticulously. $12.37. The electricity bill alone was $89. And then there was his grandmother's medicine, another $60 that they couldn't afford to skip. A violent coughing fit from the bedroom interrupted his calculations. Jamal rushed to fill a glass with water and put the kettle on for tea. The coughing continued, each hack seeming to tear at Rachel's frail body. "Gran, you okay?" He helped her sit up, offering the water with one hand while supporting her back with the other. When the coughing subsided, Rachel's eyes, watery but kind, found his. "Just the usual, baby. Nothing to worry about." But the blood-stained tissue she quickly hid told a different story. Jamal prepared the makeshift tea, the same tea bag he'd already used twice today, and added an extra spoonful of honey to mask the weakened flavor. His grandmother accepted it with trembling hands. "The bill came," she said. It wasn't a question. "I got it covered, Gran." The lie came easily, wrapped in a reassuring smile. "You just focus on getting better, okay?" Rachel nodded, too exhausted to question him further. As she drifted back to sleep, Jamal made his decision. The medicine would have to come first. Maybe he could convince the electric company to give them one more extension. He'd been washing cars on weekends and helping the superintendent with small repairs after school, but it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. Tucking the bill into his jacket pocket, Jamal grabbed the umbrella with the broken spoke and headed out into the downpour. The rain had intensified, falling in sheets that reduced visibility to mere feet. Wind gusts turned the umbrella inside out within seconds, rendering it useless. Jamal abandoned it in a trash can and pulled his hood tighter, hunching his shoulders against the deluge. The electric company office was 20 blocks away. The bus would take half his money, so walking was the only option. As he trudged forward, the bill pressed against his chest like a weight. His sneakers, already worn through at the soles, offered little protection against the puddles that had formed on the uneven sidewalk. By the time he reached downtown, night had begun to fall, darkening the already gloomy sky. The storm showed no signs of relenting. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the office building across the street, closed. A sign on the door indicated they had shut early due to the weather. Jamal's heart sank. He'd wasted the journey. Seeking shelter from the torrential rain, he looked around desperately. The bus stop's plastic roof had a gaping hole, allowing water to pour through. Most stores had already closed, their employees having fled home before the worst of the storm hit. He found a small overhang outside a shuttered bookstore and pressed himself against the wall, trying to minimize his exposure to the rain. His clothes were soaked through, clinging uncomfortably to his skin. The chill had begun to seep into his bones. Through the curtain of rain, Jamal spotted an elderly woman across the street, struggling with several shopping bags. She was perhaps 70, with silver hair plastered to her head by the rain. Her slight frame bent under the weight of the grocery bags as she navigated the slippery sidewalk with uncertain steps. As Jamal watched, the woman's foot caught on an uneven patch of concrete. She stumbled, barely managing to stay upright, but dropped one of her bags. Canned goods spilled onto the wet pavement, rolling in different directions. For a moment, Jamal hesitated. His hand found the bill in his pocket, a reminder of his own urgent mission. His grandmother's labored breathing echoed in his memory, but the old woman was now trying to bend down to retrieve her groceries, precariously balanced and likely to fall at any moment. "Damn it," Jamal muttered, pushing himself away from the relative dryness of the wall. He darted across the street, splashing through puddles, and reached the woman just as she was about to topple over. "I got it, ma'am," he said, steadying her with one hand while bending to collect the scattered cans with the other. "Please, let me help you with these." The woman looked at him with surprise, water dripping from her nose and chin. "Oh, thank you, young man. These old bones aren't what they used to be." Jamal quickly gathered the fallen items and placed them back in the bag. "Let me carry these for you. Where are you headed?" "Just to the Parkview Inn, about 6 blocks from here," she replied, trying to take back one of the bags. "But I couldn't possibly trouble you." "It's no trouble," Jamal insisted, already picking up the heaviest bags. "I'm headed that way anyway." Another small lie. They began walking together, the woman introducing herself as Eleanor. Her pace was slow, and Jamal adjusted his stride to match hers. The rain continued to pour, but somehow having a purpose made it more bearable. "Are you in school, young man?" Eleanor asked as they walked. "Yes, ma'am. 8th grade at Westside Middle." "Do you enjoy it?" Jamal shrugged. "I like science, and math is okay. But I miss a lot. Got to work, you know." Eleanor's gaze was thoughtful. "Work? At your age?" There was something in her tone, not pity, but genuine interest, that made Jamal open up. "My grand's sick. Lung disease. I do odd jobs when I can, washing cars, helping the Superfix stuff, but it's not enough lately." He didn't know why he was telling her this. Maybe it was the kind way she listened, or perhaps the anonymity of the storm made confessions easier. "Today I was trying to pay our electric bill," he continued, gesturing with his chin toward his pocket. "But the office closed early because of the storm. If we don't pay by Friday, they'll cut the power. And Gran needs her oxygen machine at night." Eleanor's expression softened with concern. "And the medicine? Is it expensive?" $60 a month. That's with the generic version." They walked in silence for a moment, the only sound the relentless patter of rain and occasional distant thunder. "What about your parents?" Eleanor asked gently. "Mom died when I was 7. Cancer. Dad's somewhere left when I was 2. Jamal had long since learned to state these facts without emotion. It was simply his reality. As they approached the Parkview Inn, a modest 3-story building with peeling paint but clean windows, Eleanor turned to him. "Thank you for your help, Jamal. I don't think I would have made it back without dropping everything." She reached into her purse and pulled out some folded bills. "Please take this, for your time and kindness." Jamal stepped back, shaking his head. "No, ma'am. I didn't help to get paid. You needed help, that's all." Eleanor studied him for a long moment. "You're an unusual young man, Jamal. Most would have taken the money without hesitation." "My gran says character is what you do when no one's watching," he replied with a small smile. "But in this storm, I guess no one was watching anyway." As he handed over the last of the grocery bags, Eleanor leaned in close. "Kindness always returns to those who give it," she whispered, her voice nearly lost in the sound of the rain. Jamal nodded, though he wasn't sure what she meant. With a final goodbye, he turned and began the long walk back to his apartment, his clothes heavy with rainwater, his sneakers squelching with each step. The storm seemed to intensify as he made his way home, as if punishing him for the detour. Lightning split the sky in jagged patterns, followed seconds later by thunderclaps that reverberated through his chest. By the time he reached his building, it was fully dark, the streetlights creating hazy orbs in the rain-filled air. The stairwell was dimly lit, with one bulb flickering ominously on the third-floor landing. Jamal climbed the 5 flights to his apartment, each step heavier than the last. His key stuck in the lock, requiring several jiggling attempts before the door finally swung open. He called out softly, "Gran, I'm back." No response. Reaching for the light switch, Jamal flicked it up and down. Nothing happened. Confusion gave way to dawning horror as he realized the apartment was completely dark. From the bedroom came the sound that would haunt his nightmares. His grandmother's violent, desperate coughing in the darkness. The electricity had been cut off, and now the oxygen machine that kept her breathing through the night stood silent and useless beside her bed. The violent coughing echoed through the darkened apartment as Jamal fumbled his way toward the bedroom. His heart hammered against his ribs while his hands searched desperately for the flashlight they kept by the door for emergencies. Finding it, he clicked it on, the weak beam cutting through the darkness. "Gran!" Jamal called, rushing to her bedside. Rachel's face was contorted in pain, her hands clutching at her chest as she struggled to draw breath. The silent oxygen machine, their lifeline, stood useless beside her. "Hold on, Gran, hold on," he whispered, his mind racing through options. The emergency candles were in the kitchen drawer. He squeezed her hand before darting back, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly as he ran. With trembling fingers, Jamal lit 3 stubby candles, arranging them on a chipped plate. The flickering light cast eerie shadows across the walls as he returned to his grandmother's side. Her breathing was shallow now, but the coughing fit had subsided momentarily. "They cut it early," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry, Gran. I tried to—" Rachel shook her head weakly, reaching for his hand. "Not your fault," she managed between labored breaths. Jamal's mind worked frantically. The oxygen machine needed power, and they had none. But his neighbor, Mr. Diaz in 5C, had mentioned something about a small generator he used during outages. "I'll be right back," Jamal promised, already moving toward the door. "Just hold on." The hallway was pitch black, the building's emergency lights having failed years ago. Guided by his fading flashlight, Jamal pounded on Mr. Diaz's door. No answer. He tried Mrs. Martinez across the hall, relief washing over him when her door cracked open. "Jamal, what's wrong, child?" The elderly woman peered out, holding a rosary. "They cut our power," he explained breathlessly. "Gran can't breathe without her machine. Do you have ice? Anything cold?" Mrs. Martinez nodded gravely. "Come quickly." Inside her apartment, illuminated by prayer candles, she opened her freezer and scooped ice into a plastic bag. "Cold helps open the airways," she explained, pressing the makeshift ice pack into his hands. "And take this." She handed him a small bottle of eucalyptus oil. "Put a few drops on a cloth near her face. It will help until morning." Jamal thanked her profusely before rushing back to his grandmother. The night stretched endlessly as he alternated between applying the ice pack to Rachel's chest and holding the eucalyptus-soaked cloth near her face. The candles burned down to stubs, and still, he maintained his vigil, whispering reassurances even as fear gripped his heart. Somewhere near dawn, exhaustion overtook him. Jamal fell asleep sitting upright against the bed frame, his hand still clasping his grandmother's. The roar of jet engines tore him from sleep. The noise was deafening, unlike anything he'd heard before in their neighborhood. Disoriented, Jamal blinked against the gray morning light filtering through the window. Rachel was sleeping, her breathing still labored but more regular than the night before. The thunderous sound continued, rattling the cracked window pane. Jamal staggered to his feet and peered outside. What he saw made him rub his eyes in disbelief. A sleek, private jet was descending toward the abandoned field beyond the housing project, a stretch of vacant land that had never been anything more than a dumping ground for the neighborhood. The silver aircraft gleamed against the dull morning sky, its engines stirring up dust and debris as it prepared to land. "What the hell?" Jamal muttered, watching as the jet touched down on the improvised runway. Below in the courtyard, neighbors were emerging from their apartments, pointing and speculating loudly about the unusual sight. Within minutes, a procession of black SUVs with tinted windows appeared, driving toward the field where the jet had landed. The vehicles formed a perimeter around the aircraft as a small staircase extended from its side. Jamal was so transfixed by the scene that he almost didn't hear the change in his grandmother's breathing. When he turned, he saw her face contorted in pain, her lips taking on a bluish tinge as she gasped for air. "Gran!" He rushed to her side, panic rising in his throat. This was worse than last night, much worse. Her hands clutched at the bed sheets, knuckles white with strain. "I need to get you to the hospital," he decided, his voice shaking but determined. "Right now." Mrs. Martinez appeared at their door moments after Jamal called for help, bringing with her a rickety wheelchair borrowed from another neighbor. Together they carefully transferred Rachel into it, wrapping her in a thin blanket despite the warm morning. "The bus will take too long," Mrs. Martinez said, pressing a few crumpled bills into Jamal's hand. "Take a taxi if you see one." Outside, the neighborhood was in unusual disarray. People clustered in small groups, all attention directed toward the field where the jet had landed. More official-looking vehicles had arrived, and men in suits were establishing a perimeter with yellow tape. "What's happening?" Jamal asked a neighbor as they maneuvered Rachel's wheelchair toward the main road. "Some big-shot billionaire," the man replied without taking his eyes off the scene. "Whole fleet of cars coming in. They're blocking half the streets already." Jamal's heart sank as they rounded the corner. The man wasn't exaggerating. A traffic jam had formed where there was usually none, with cars backed up for blocks. Police officers were redirecting traffic, and news vans were setting up equipment on the sidewalks. "We have to find another way," Jamal told Mrs. Martinez, desperation creeping into his voice as Rachel's breathing became more erratic. They tried a side street, only to find it equally congested. The morning sun beat down on them as they searched for a clear route to the hospital, which was still 15 blocks away. Rachel's condition deteriorated with each passing minute, her consciousness fading in and out. Near a cordoned-off intersection, a commotion drew Jamal's attention. Reporters and photographers swarmed around a convoy of black limousines that had just pulled up. The central car's door opened, and security personnel in dark suits formed a protective barrier around the vehicle. Through the gaps between bodies, Jamal caught a glimpse of an elegantly dressed elderly woman emerging from the limousine. Her silver hair was perfectly coiffed, and she wore a tailored blue suit that spoke of quiet wealth. There was something familiar about her that made Jamal pause. As the woman turned slightly, her profile became visible, and Jamal's jaw dropped in recognition. It was Eleanor, the same woman he had helped with her groceries during the storm. Only now, she wasn't a vulnerable old lady struggling with shopping bags. She was clearly someone of immense importance. "Eleanor Prescott, can you comment on your foundation's plans for this community?" a reporter shouted, thrusting a microphone forward. "Ms. Prescott, is it true you're investing $50 million in urban renewal here?" The name hit Jamal like a physical blow. Eleanor Prescott, the reclusive billionaire philanthropist whose rare public appearances made headlines. He had seen her once on a magazine cover at school, in an article about the world's wealthiest women, and he had carried her groceries without having any idea who she was. A sudden wheezing gasp from Rachel snapped Jamal back to reality. His grandmother's condition was critical now. Her eyes were rolling back, and her breathing was becoming increasingly shallow. "She needs help right now!" Jamal cried out, looking frantically around. But they were trapped in the chaos, invisible in the shadow of wealth and power that had suddenly descended on their neighborhood. A desperate idea formed in Jamal's mind. Leaving Mrs. Martinez with his grandmother for a moment, he began pushing through the crowd toward the security perimeter, ignoring the protests and shoves from those he passed. "Please, I need help," he shouted, trying to make himself heard above the clamor of questions from the press. "My grandmother can't breathe." A tall security guard stepped into his path, hand outstretched to stop him. "Stay back, kid. This is a restricted area." "But I know her," Jamal insisted, pointing toward Eleanor, who was now addressing the media with practiced composure. "She knows me too. I helped her yesterday during the storm." The guard's expression hardened. "Yeah, right. Step back now, or I'll have to remove you." Desperation gave Jamal courage. He ducked under the guard's arm and sprinted toward the limousine, shouting Eleanor's name. Immediately, 2 more security personnel moved to intercept him, grabbing his arms roughly. "Wait!" Jamal cried as they began dragging him away. "Ms. Prescott, Eleanor, it's Jamal, from last night in the rain." The commotion caused Eleanor to pause mid-sentence, her eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on Jamal struggling in the guard's grip. For a terrible moment, her expression remained blank, and Jamal feared she wouldn't recognize him. Or worse, that she would pretend not to. Then her eyes widened in recognition. She raised a hand and the security team froze. "Release him immediately," she commanded, her voice carrying unexpected authority for someone of her slight stature. The guards hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances. "I said, release him," Eleanor repeated firmly. "Now." They complied reluctantly, though one kept a warning hand on Jamal's shoulder. Eleanor approached, the crowd of reporters parting before her. Up close, she looked both familiar and strange, the same kind eyes from last night now set in a face framed by expensive jewelry, her simple raincoat replaced by designer clothes. "Jamal," she said, genuine warmth in her voice. "What's wrong? Why are you here?" Words tumbled out of him in a rush. "My grandmother, she can't breathe. The power was cut. Her oxygen machine." He pointed desperately toward where Mrs. Martinez waited with Rachel's slumped form in the wheelchair. Eleanor followed his gaze, her expression shifting from confusion to alarm as she took in the situation. She turned to her entourage, issuing rapid instructions. Within moments, her personal physician was rushing toward Rachel, and security personnel were clearing a path. The guards who had restrained Jamal moments before now looked uncertain, even embarrassed. One of them stepped forward, hand extended apologetically. "Sorry, kid. We didn't know." Eleanor silenced him with a look. She placed her hand firmly on Jamal's shoulder and addressed everyone within earshot, security personnel, reporters, and onlookers alike, with unmistakable authority. "This young man saved my life last night," she declared, her voice ringing clear above the murmurs. "And now it's our turn to save his." Eleanor's words hung in the air as the crowd around them fell silent. Security personnel immediately began clearing a path through the throng of reporters and onlookers. Jamal watched in stunned silence as Eleanor's team moved with practiced efficiency, transforming chaos into order within seconds. "Dr. Winters, this way please," Eleanor called, and a tall man with silver-rimmed glasses rushed forward, medical bag in hand. The doctor knelt beside Rachel's wheelchair, quickly checking her vital signs. His expression remained professional, but Jamal could see the concern in his eyes as he placed an oxygen mask over Rachel's face. The portable tank it was connected to seemed to materialize from nowhere. "She needs immediate medical attention," Dr. Winters announced, looking up at Eleanor. "Her oxygen saturation is dangerously low." Eleanor nodded decisively. "Prepare the mobile unit. Within moments, what Jamal had initially mistaken for an ordinary ambulance pulled up. As the doors opened, he glimpsed an interior that looked more like an intensive care unit than an emergency vehicle. "This is our medical transport," Eleanor explained, noticing Jamal's wide-eyed expression. "It's equipped with everything your grandmother needs." Rachel was carefully transferred into the vehicle, the medical team working with quiet efficiency. Jamal moved to follow but hesitated, turning to Mrs. Martinez, who stood watching with tears in her eyes. "Go," she urged, embracing him quickly. "I'll check on your apartment. Don't worry about anything else now." Inside the mobile unit, Jamal was overwhelmed by the technology surrounding them. Monitors displayed Rachel's heartbeat, blood pressure, and oxygen levels. The interior was spacious, nothing like the cramped ambulances he'd seen before. Eleanor sat beside him as the vehicle pulled away, sirens clearing their path through the congested streets. "She's going to be all right," she assured him, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. "Dr. Winters is one of the best pulmonologists in the country." "Pulmonologist?" Jamal questioned, the medical terminology unfamiliar. "Lung specialist," Eleanor clarified. "I brought him because I'm funding a respiratory research center here. That's why I came to your neighborhood." As the medical team worked on stabilizing Rachel, Jamal struggled to reconcile the Eleanor from last night with the powerful figure beside him now. "You're Eleanor Prescott," he finally said, the reality of the situation sinking in. "The billionaire?" A small smile crossed Eleanor's face. "Yes, though I prefer scientist to billionaire. Money is just a tool, Jamal. Knowledge is what truly changes lives." The vehicle turned onto a private road, leading away from the direction of the public hospital Jamal had expected. "Where are we going?" he asked, suddenly anxious. "To my temporary headquarters," Eleanor replied. "I've converted the penthouse suite at the Grand Hotel into a medical facility. Your grandmother will receive better care there than at any hospital in the city." Jamal watched the neighborhood recede through the window, familiar streets giving way to increasingly affluent areas. Eleanor's voice drew his attention back. "I was visiting your community incognito yesterday," she explained. "I wanted to see it without the fanfare, to understand what people really need before announcing my foundation's project." "And then I made you carry your own groceries in the rain," Jamal said, embarrassment washing over him. Eleanor laughed, a genuine, warm sound. "It was the most authentic interaction I've had in years. No one trying to impress me or ask for funding. Just human kindness." Her expression grew more serious. "That's rare in my world, Jamal." The vehicle slowed as they approached an elegant hotel that Jamal had only seen from a distance. A private entrance was already cordoned off, staff waiting attentively as they arrived. Rachel was transferred to a gurney and wheeled rapidly through private elevators and hallways, eventually arriving at what had once been the hotel's presidential suite. Now it resembled a high-tech medical facility with equipment Jamal had only seen on television shows. "Your grandmother needs a special breathing treatment," Dr. Winters explained, as nurses connected Rachel to various machines. "We'll also run some tests to understand exactly what's causing her condition to worsen." Jamal nodded, overwhelmed by the sudden transformation of their circumstances. Just hours ago, they had been sitting in darkness, Rachel struggling for each breath. Now she was receiving care beyond anything they could have afforded or imagined. As Rachel's condition stabilized, Eleanor guided Jamal to a sitting area overlooking the city. From this height, he could see his entire neighborhood in the distance, the housing project, the abandoned field where Eleanor's jet had landed, the school he attended. "You must have questions," Eleanor said, sitting across from him. "A million," Jamal admitted. "Why here? Our neighborhood, I mean. There are plenty of poor places that need help." Eleanor's expression softened with remembered pain. She reached into her purse and removed a small framed photograph, handing it to Jamal. The image showed a young boy, perhaps 9 or 10, with Eleanor's same kind eyes. "This was Michael, my grandson," she said quietly. "He died 3 years ago from pulmonary fibrosis, a lung disease similar to what your grandmother has." Jamal studied the photo, recognizing the oxygen tube in the boy's nose, so similar to what Rachel used. "I'm sorry," he said, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Michael's last wish was that I would help others with similar conditions," Eleanor continued. "I've established research centers across the country, but they're all in affluent areas with existing medical infrastructure. Your community has one of the highest rates of respiratory illness in the nation, yet the nearest specialized care facility is 40 miles away." Standing, Eleanor led Jamal to a table covered with blueprints and models. "This is why I came," she explained, showing him the plans for a state-of-the-art respiratory care clinic. "We'll build it on the eastern edge of your neighborhood, where that abandoned factory stands now." Jamal examined the model with growing amazement. The design was modern yet welcoming, with gardens and natural light throughout. "It's amazing," he breathed. "It's only the beginning," Eleanor replied. "But first, let's focus on your grandmother." Dr. Winters approached, tablet in hand. "We've stabilized Mrs. Johnson's condition," he reported. "Her oxygen levels are improving, but I'm concerned about the underlying infection in her lungs. With your permission, I'd like to start her on a new antibiotic treatment." "Whatever she needs," Jamal said immediately. The doctor nodded. "She'll need to remain here for observation for at least a few days. You're welcome to stay as well, of course." As Dr. Winters returned to Rachel, Jamal suddenly realized he was still wearing the same clothes from yesterday, now wrinkled and stained. Eleanor, noticing his discomfort, arranged for a hotel staff member to bring him clean clothes in his size. "You should rest," she told him. "There's a bedroom through that door. Your grandmother is in good hands." "I should check on our apartment," Jamal said hesitantly. "And I need to get some of Gran's things. Her medication, her glasses." Eleanor nodded understandingly. "Of course. I'll have someone drive you back when you're ready." While waiting, Jamal glimpsed a news broadcast on a screen in the corner of the room. The headline read, "Billionaire philanthropist makes surprise visit to Westside." Video footage showed the commotion from earlier, and briefly, Jamal could see himself being restrained by security. Another notification sound drew his attention to Eleanor's phone, which seemed to be constantly buzzing with messages. She glanced at it with a slight frown. "Is everything okay?" Jamal asked. "Just the usual when I make a public appearance," she replied. "The mayor wants a meeting. Investors are curious about my plans, and it seems every local official suddenly remembers they've always cared deeply about your community." Her wry tone made Jamal smile despite his exhaustion. "Nobody cared yesterday," he observed. "That's often how it works," Eleanor agreed. "Money changes how people see places and problems." She set the phone down. "But I didn't come here for photo opportunities with politicians. I came because people like your grandmother need help." Before they could continue, an assistant approached Eleanor with an urgent message. While she was occupied, Jamal went to check on Rachel. She was awake now, though groggy, her eyes widening in confusion at the unfamiliar surroundings. "Jamal?" she whispered through the oxygen mask. "Where are we?" He took her hand gently. "It's okay, Gran. You're getting the best care now. I met someone who's helping us." Rachel's eyes questioned him silently, too weak to remove her mask to speak. "It's a long story," Jamal said with a small smile. "But remember how you always said kindness comes back to you? You were right." When he returned to the main room, Eleanor was ending her call, looking troubled. "Is everything all right?" he asked. "Reporters are already at your apartment building," she sighed. "I'm afraid our encounter has become quite the story." Jamal's heart sank. "Our apartment is being watched over by security now," Eleanor assured him. but I think we should send someone else to collect your things. Would Mrs. Martinez know what your grandmother needs?" Jamal nodded, giving Eleanor the neighbor's phone number. Within minutes, arrangements were made for Rachel's essential items to be brought to the hotel. As the day progressed, Jamal observed Eleanor working tirelessly, alternating between checking on Rachel, consulting with her medical team, and handling what seemed like endless calls and messages. Despite her wealth and status, she personally brought Jamal lunch and ensured he was comfortable. By evening, Rachel's condition had improved significantly. The infection was responding to treatment, and her breathing was more regular. For the first time in months, Jamal saw color returning to his grandmother's cheeks. "The treatment she's receiving would normally cost thousands per day," Dr. Winters explained to Jamal as they watched Rachel sleep peacefully. "The medication alone is experimental, not yet widely available." "I can't pay for any of this," Jamal admitted, the reality of their situation hitting him anew. The doctor placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Eleanor has taken care of everything. Your grandmother will receive complete treatment for as long as necessary." When Jamal tried to thank Eleanor, she waved away his gratitude. "This is why I built my foundation," she said simply, "to help people who need it most." But as night fell, Jamal noticed Eleanor's expression growing increasingly concerned as she reviewed messages on her tablet. Something was troubling her deeply. "What's wrong?" he finally asked. Eleanor hesitated before answering. "When someone like me appears somewhere unexpectedly, it creates complications. Your neighborhood is suddenly the center of attention. Not all of it is positive." She showed him news footage of people gathering outside his apartment building, some claiming to know him and Rachel, others protesting the sudden influx of security personnel in the area. Local politicians were already giving interviews, claiming credit for bringing Eleanor's attention to the community. "I'm afraid our meeting might have caused more disruption than I anticipated," Eleanor said, her voice heavy with regret. "It's not your fault," Jamal assured her. "People are just—" He trailed off, unsure how to explain the complex dynamics of his community to someone from Eleanor's world. When Jamal finally returned to his apartment the next day to collect more of their belongings, escorted by Eleanor's security team, he was shocked to find a small crowd gathered outside. As he approached, he recognized many faces. Neighbors who had barely acknowledged him before. Local business owners, even his school principal. "There he is!" someone shouted, and suddenly everyone was pressing forward, voices overlapping. "Jamal, can you introduce me to Ms. Prescott?" "My sister has asthma worse than your grandmother. Is it true she's giving you $1 million?" The security guards created a barrier, but not before Jamal glimpsed the front door of his apartment. Broken open, with clear signs that people had been inside. When he finally entered, he found the space violated in ways he hadn't expected. Drawers had been rummaged through, Rachel's medications disturbed, and their few valuable possessions were missing. On the kitchen table lay a reporter's business card with a note. "Exclusive interview, we pay cash." As Jamal stood in the center of the chaos that had once been his home, his phone rang. It was Eleanor. "The good news is that your grandmother's responding well to treatment," she said. "But I've just been informed that several media outlets are reporting that you and I had prearranged our meeting. They're suggesting you manipulated the situation for financial gain." The accusation stung like a physical blow. Jamal sank into a chair, surrounded by the evidence of how quickly his life had spiraled out of control. "Maybe the best solution would be for me to leave," Eleanor said softly, leaving the hotel room, while Jamal, with a heavy heart, realized that the problem wasn't her presence, but the absence of unity that had always existed in his community. The first punch caught Jamal off guard, a blur of motion that ended with pain exploding across his left cheek. He stumbled backward, more shocked than hurt, his eyes struggling to focus on the faces of the teenagers surrounding him. The dim streetlight cast their shadows long across the cracked pavement. Not so special now, are you? Marcus sneered, shaking out his hand. At 15, he was 3 years older than Jamal and nearly a foot taller. Two other boys flanked him, their expressions a mixture of resentment and excitement. I don't want trouble, Jamal said, tasting blood where his teeth had cut the inside of his cheek. I'm just trying to get home. Home? Marcus laughed, the sound echoing in the empty street. You mean back to your fancy hotel? Or is the billionaire buying you a mansion now? The second punch Jamal saw coming, but he was too slow to dodge it completely. It glanced off his shoulder, sending him stumbling further back into the narrow alley between buildings. The brick wall scraped against his back as he tried to maintain his balance. You think you're better than us now? Marcus advanced, his friends spreading out to block any escape route. My mom's been sick for years. Where's her billionaire savior? Jamal's mind raced. He had known Marcus since elementary school. They'd never been friends, but they'd never been enemies either. Just two kids from the same struggling neighborhood trying to survive. What had changed? It wasn't like that, Jamal tried to explain. I was just helping an old lady with her groceries. I didn't know who she was. Bullshit, Marcus spat. Nobody just runs into Eleanor Prescott. You set the whole thing up. Before Jamal could respond, another blow caught him in the stomach, doubling him over. The pain was immediate and intense, driving the air from his lungs. As he gasped for breath, hands grabbed his shoulders, shoving him hard against the wall. How much is she paying you? One of the other boys demanded. The news said she's worth billions. You must be getting a nice cut. I'm not getting anything, Jamal wheezed, struggling to stand upright. She's just helping my gran. Marcus's face twisted with disbelief. Yeah, right. And all those reporters just happened to be there? The whole neighborhood's talking about how you played that old lady. The accusation stung worse than the physical blows. Jamal had spent his whole life trying to be the person his grandmother raised him to be, honest, hard-working, compassionate. Now, in the span of 24 hours, he had become something else in everyone's eyes. An opportunist, a manipulator. It wasn't planned, Jamal insisted, a note of desperation creeping into his voice. I swear I was just... The next punch caught him squarely in the jaw, snapping his head back against the brick with enough force to make his vision blur. Pain exploded behind his eyes, bright stars dancing across a darkening field of vision. His knees buckled. As Jamal slid down the wall, he heard distant shouting, a woman's voice, stern and authoritative. The boys scattered, their footsteps receding rapidly down the alley. A moment later, gentle hands were on his shoulders. Jamal, can you hear me? It's Mrs. Carvalho from school. He recognized his Portuguese teacher's voice before his vision cleared enough to see her concerned face hovering over him. Behind her stood the school security guard, Mr. Washington, who must have scared off Marcus and his friends. I'm okay, Jamal mumbled, though the throbbing pain in his head suggested otherwise. You most certainly are not, Mrs. Carvalho said firmly. Washington, call an ambulance. No, Jamal protested, struggling to sit up. No ambulance, I can't afford... He stopped, remembering that money might no longer be an issue, at least for his grandmother's care. But old habits died hard. Then we're taking you to the hospital ourselves, Mrs. Carvalho decided, her tone brooking no argument. Washington, help him to my car. The journey to the hospital passed in a haze of pain and disjointed thoughts. Jamal kept thinking about Marcus's accusations, about the reporters at his apartment, about Eleanor's suggestion that she might leave. Had his act of kindness somehow made everything worse? The emergency room was chaotic as usual, but to Jamal's surprise, he was seen almost immediately. It wasn't until a nurse mentioned Ms. Prescott's instructions that he understood why. Eleanor had apparently notified all local hospitals to give him priority care if he showed up. The diagnosis was better than he feared. No concussion, just severe bruising and a small cut that required 2 stitches near his eyebrow. As the doctor finished bandaging his face, Jamal's phone rang. Eleanor. "Jamal, the hospital just called me. What happened?" Her voice was tight with concern. He hesitated, unsure how much to tell her. "Just some kids from school. It's nothing." "It's not nothing if you needed medical attention," Eleanor replied sharply. "Was this because of me? Because of what's happening?" The question hung between them, laden with implications. Jamal closed his eyes, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. "Some people think I set everything up," he admitted finally. "That I manipulated you for money." Eleanor's sigh was audible even through the phone. "I was afraid of this. Jamal, I'm so sorry. This is exactly what I wanted to avoid by visiting incognito first." "It's not your fault," Jamal insisted, wincing as he shifted position on the examination table. "Your grandmother's been asking for you," Eleanor said, changing the subject. "The doctors say she's strong enough for a short visit if you're up to it." 20 minutes later, a private car delivered Jamal to the hotel where Rachel was being treated. When he entered her room, he tried to smile naturally, hoping the dim lighting would hide the worst of his injuries. It was a futile effort. "Jamal," Rachel gasped, her eyes widening at the sight of his bandaged face. "What happened to you, baby?" "It's nothing, Gran. Just a disagreement with some kids from school." He took her hand, marveling at how much stronger her grip felt after just 1 day of proper treatment. The color had returned to her cheeks, and though she still wore an oxygen cannula, her breathing was visibly easier. "Don't lie to me," Rachel said sternly. "This is about that woman, isn't it? About all this." She gestured around the luxurious hospital room. Before Jamal could answer, Eleanor appeared in the doorway, her expression somber. "May I come in?" Rachel studied her with undisguised suspicion. "So you're the billionaire who's turned our lives upside down." "Gran," Jamal protested, but Eleanor raised a hand to stop him. "Mrs. Johnson, you have every right to be wary," she said, approaching the bed. "I came to your neighborhood with good intentions, but I'm afraid my presence has complicated things for your grandson." Rachel's expression softened slightly. "Jamal says you're helping people with lung disease because of your grandson." Eleanor nodded, her composure cracking momentarily. "Michael, he was 10 when we lost him." A look of understanding passed between the two women, the universal recognition of suffering that transcended differences in wealth and circumstance. "Sit down," Rachel said finally, gesturing to the chair beside her bed. "And tell me exactly what's going on with my grandson and why he came in here looking like he went 10 rounds with a prize fighter." The conversation that followed was both painful and necessary. Eleanor explained about the media frenzy, the political opportunism, and the growing resentment from some community members who saw Jamal as having received special treatment. Rachel, in turn, spoke about their life before, the constant struggle to afford medication, the nights spent worrying about bills, the weight of responsibility on Jamal's young shoulders. As they talked, Jamal moved to the window, looking out at the city lights. From this height, his neighborhood was just a cluster of dim squares in the distance. Yet in the past 2 days, it had become the center of attention, for reasons having nothing to do with its actual needs. On the television mounted on the wall, a local news channel was covering Eleanor's visit. The sound was muted, but Jamal could read the scrolling headline: "Billionaire's Charity or Calculated PR Move." The screen split to show footage from earlier that day, neighbors crowding around reporters, each telling some version of hardship that might attract attention or aid. "Turn that off," Rachel said sharply, noticing where Jamal's attention had gone. When he did, she turned back to Eleanor. "Now, what's this my grandson tells me about you thinking of leaving?" Eleanor looked surprised, then slightly embarrassed. "I'm considering whether my presence is doing more harm than good. The last thing I wanted was to create division or put Jamal in danger." Rachel hummed skeptically. So your solution is to walk away? After stirring everything up? Gran, Jamal began, but Rachel silenced him with a look. No, let me finish. Ms. Prescott, my grandson has been carrying weights too heavy for him since he was 7 years old. He's missed school to work odd jobs, gone hungry so I could have medicine, and never once complained. That boy helped you in the rain not because he wanted something, but because that's who he is. Rachel's voice grew stronger with each word. Now he's being punished for it, and your answer is to leave? Eleanor had the grace to look chastened. You're right, of course. Leaving solves nothing. Damn straight it doesn't, Rachel agreed. So instead of running away, why don't we figure out how to fix this mess? The discussion continued late into the evening, evolving into a strategy session. By the time Jamal and Eleanor left Rachel to rest, they had the beginnings of a plan, one that would address both the immediate crisis and the longer-term needs of the community. In the hallway outside Rachel's room, Eleanor paused. Your grandmother is quite formidable. Jamal smiled despite his aching face. You have no idea. I think I might, Eleanor replied with newfound respect. She reminds me of myself at her age, before wealth insulated me from certain realities. As they walked toward the suite where Jamal would be staying for the night, Eleanor's phone buzzed continuously with messages and calls. She ignored them, focusing instead on their conversation. Tomorrow, we'll start setting things right, she promised. But for tonight, you need rest and recovery. Jamal nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted he truly was. The adrenaline that had carried him through the day was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and aching pain from his injuries. At the door to his room, Eleanor hesitated. Jamal, I want you to know something. In all my years of philanthropy, I've never met anyone quite like you. What you did for me in the rain, expecting nothing in return, it reminded me why I started my foundation in the first place. Jamal ducked his head, uncomfortable with the praise. Anyone would have helped. No, Eleanor said firmly. They wouldn't have. That's the point. After she left, Jamal collapsed onto the plush hotel bed, too tired even to change out of his clothes. As he drifted toward sleep, the day's events replayed in disjointed flashes. Marcus's angry face, the reporter's invasive questions, his grandmother's determined expression, Eleanor's promise to make things right. The last punch hit Jamal in the face with enough force to make him fall against the sidewalk. As his vision darkened, he heard a distant voice calling for help and thought about how a simple act of kindness had transformed his life into a nightmare. Fluorescent light pierced through Jamal's eyelids, bringing him slowly back to consciousness. A dull, throbbing pain radiated from his face as he blinked, disoriented by the sterile white ceiling above him. The antiseptic smell filled his nostrils, triggering an immediate recognition. Hospital. He's waking up, a gentle voice announced nearby. Jamal turned his head slightly, wincing at the pain that shot through his jaw. A nurse in blue scrubs adjusted something on the monitor beside his bed. You're at Memorial Hospital, Jamal, she explained, noting his confusion. You were found unconscious last night. Do you remember what happened? The memories flooded back in jagged fragments. Marcus's angry face, the accusations, punches landing with sickening impact, then darkness. He nodded slightly, immediately regretting the movement. Your grandmother is on the same floor, the nurse continued, checking his vitals. She's been asking about you all morning. Before Jamal could respond, the door opened, and Eleanor stepped in. The composed, elegant billionaire from the news footage was gone. This Eleanor looked exhausted, her silver hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, dark circles lining her eyes. When she saw Jamal awake, relief washed over her face. Thank goodness, she breathed, approaching his bedside. Her eyes widened as she took in the full extent of his injuries, the purple bruising spreading across his cheekbone, the swollen lip, the butterfly bandage holding together the cut above his eyebrow. "Who did this to you?" she asked, her voice wavering somewhere between concern and controlled fury. Jamal shifted uncomfortably under her intense gaze. "Just some guys from school. It's nothing." "This is not nothing, Jamal." Eleanor gestured to his face. "Was it random, or—" Her unfinished question hung in the air between them. Jamal knew what she was really asking. Was this because of her? "They think I set everything up," he admitted quietly. "That I played you for money or something." Eleanor's face fell, and she sank into the chair beside his bed. "This is exactly what I was afraid would happen." The nurse finished her checks and quietly left the room, leaving them in a heavy silence, broken only by the steady beeping of the monitoring equipment. "Can I see my grandmother?" Jamal finally asked, attempting to sit up. "Of course." Eleanor helped him into a wheelchair, dismissing his protests that he could walk. "The doctor wants you to take it easy. You were concussed." They made their way down the corridor to Rachel's room. Despite his own discomfort, Jamal felt a rush of relief when he saw his grandmother. She was sitting up in bed, her breathing noticeably easier than it had been in months. The advanced treatments were clearly working. Her skin had regained some color, and the permanent exhaustion that had marked her features seemed less pronounced. When Rachel spotted Jamal in the wheelchair, her relief transformed instantly to alarm. "Lord have mercy!" she gasped, eyes widening at his battered face. "What happened to my boy?" "I'm okay, Gran," Jamal assured her, wheeling closer to her bedside. "It looks worse than it is." "Don't you—" "I'm okay, me." Rachel reached out to gently touch his swollen cheek. "Who did this?" Jamal hesitated, but before he could formulate a response that wouldn't worry her, Eleanor spoke from the doorway. "It was because of me, Mrs. Johnson. Because of the attention our meeting has brought to Jamal." Rachel studied Eleanor with newfound wariness. "Explain." While Jamal sat beside his grandmother's bed, Eleanor detailed the events that had transpired since they'd last spoken. The media frenzy, the invasion of their apartment, the neighborhood's mixed reactions, and now the physical assault. On the television mounted in the corner of the room, a news report played silently. Jamal's attention was drawn to it. Footage showing reporters clustered outside their apartment building, neighbors jostling for camera attention, and a local politician he barely recognized making what appeared to be an impassioned speech with their housing project as a backdrop. "They're calling you the billionaire whisperer," Eleanor said, noticing his gaze. "Ridiculous, sensationalist nonsense." Rachel clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "Turn that trash off," she directed, and Jamal complied, finding the remote beside her bed. "How are you feeling, Gran?" he asked, eager to change the subject. "Better than I have in years," she admitted, her expression softening. "These doctors know what they're doing. That Dr. Winters says my infection is responding well to the new medication." As if summoned by his name, Dr. Winters entered the room carrying a tablet. He greeted them with a professional nod. "Mrs. Johnson is making excellent progress," he confirmed, showing them a comparative scan of Rachel's lungs. "The inflammation is significantly reduced and her oxygen levels are stabilizing. We're very pleased." "When can she come home?" Jamal asked. Dr. Winters and Eleanor exchanged a glance that didn't escape Jamal's notice. "That's something we need to discuss," the doctor began carefully. "The treatment plan requires continued monitoring and specialized care for at least 2 more weeks. After that, Mrs. Johnson will need regular follow-ups and a carefully controlled environment." The implication was clear. Their apartment, with its mold problems and inconsistent electricity, was not an ideal recovery space for someone with severe respiratory issues. "We have options," Eleanor interjected, reading the concern on Jamal's face. "But we can discuss those later. For now, I want to address your immediate situation." Later, after Dr. Winters had completed his examination and left, the 3 of them sat in an uncomfortable triangle of silence. Rachel was the first to break it. "So, Miss Prescott, what happens now? You stirred up a hornet's nest in our neighborhood, and my grandson is the one getting stung." Eleanor didn't flinch at the directness. "You're right, and I take full responsibility for that. This is why I typically work through intermediaries and official channels, despite how impersonal that can seem." "Too late for that now," Rachel observed. "Yes," Eleanor agreed, "which is why we need a new approach." The door opened again, interrupting their conversation. This time, it was the principal from Jamal's school, Mr. Torres, looking distinctly uncomfortable in the hospital setting. "Jamal," he began, his tone noticeably different from any previous interaction. "I came as soon as I heard. This is completely unacceptable, and I want you to know the students involved will face serious consequences." Jamal shifted uneasily, knowing this sudden concern had more to do with Eleanor's presence than genuine care for his welfare. In 3 years at Westside Middle, he'd never known the administration to take bullying seriously. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Torres," Eleanor responded coolly before Jamal could speak. "I'm sure you understand that Jamal's safety is our primary concern right now." "Of course, Ms. Prescott. Westside Middle will provide any support necessary." The principal handed Jamal a folder. "Your assignments for the week. Your teachers send their best wishes." After he left, Rachel made a dismissive sound. "Suddenly they care about your education. Where was this concern when you were missing school to work?" Eleanor watched the interaction with thoughtful eyes. "This is part of the problem, isn't it? The hypocrisy. Everyone wanting to appear supportive now that there are cameras and money involved." A commotion outside the door drew their attention. Through the narrow window, Jamal could see a security guard blocking someone from entering. Marcus, the same boy who had beaten him unconscious, was now trying to visit him in the hospital. "Is that one of them?" Eleanor asked, following his gaze. Jamal nodded reluctantly. Eleanor moved to the door, speaking quietly to the security personnel. After a brief discussion, she returned to Jamal's side. "He says he wants to apologize. I told them to keep him out, but it's your decision." Jamal was torn. Part of him wanted nothing to do with Marcus, but another part was curious about this sudden change of heart. "Not today," he decided finally. "I can't. Not yet." Rachel reached for his hand, squeezing it gently in silent support. As evening approached, Eleanor excused herself to take a series of urgent calls. Left alone with his grandmother, Jamal finally allowed his composure to crack. "Everything's such a mess, Gran," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was just trying to help someone in the rain. How did it turn into this?" Rachel stroked his hand soothingly. "Sometimes life takes unexpected turns, baby. Good intentions can lead down complicated paths." "She's thinking about canceling the clinic," Jamal revealed. "She thinks her being here is making things worse." "Is that what you think?" Jamal considered the question seriously. "No. The neighborhood needs that clinic. Kids like Damon with asthma, Mr. Washington with his COPD, they need it. But I don't know how to fix this." Their conversation was interrupted when Eleanor returned, her expression troubled as she tucked her phone away. "That was my foundation director," she explained. "There's growing concern about the situation here. The media narrative is becoming problematic." "Meaning what, exactly?" Rachel asked directly. "Meaning some of my board members think we should reconsider the clinic project." Eleanor's voice was heavy with regret. "They're worried about the optics, about the apparent conflict, about whether this community is ready for the investment." Jamal felt his heart sink. "Because of what happened to me?" "Partly," Eleanor admitted, "and because of the neighborhood's reaction. The opportunism, the interference from local officials who previously ignored the area's problems." She sighed deeply. "They're suggesting we relocate the project to a less complicated location." So all this was for nothing, Jamal said bitterly, gesturing to his bruised face. The neighbors turning against us, my apartment being ransacked, all for a clinic that won't even happen. I didn't say I agreed with them, Eleanor countered firmly. But I can't ignore their concerns either. This project requires community support to succeed. Rachel cleared her throat. Ms. Prescott, forgive my bluntness, but it sounds like you're looking for an excuse to back out now that things have gotten messy. Eleanor looked genuinely startled by the accusation. She stood by the window for a long moment, gazing out at the city lights before turning back to face them. Maybe the best solution would be for me to go away, Eleanor said softly, leaving the room, while Jamal, with a heavy heart, realized that the problem wasn't her presence, but the absence of unity that had always existed in his community. Jamal sat on the hospital bed after Eleanor left, his mind racing despite the dull pain still throbbing at his temples. His grandmother's words echoed in his ears. The problem wasn't Eleanor's presence, but the community's lack of unity. Something clicked in his thoughts, a realization that settled with remarkable clarity despite the chaos of the past few days. Reaching for the worn notebook he kept in his backpack, Jamal began to write. His hand moved across the page with increasing confidence, outlining thoughts, plans, and possibilities. He wrote until a nurse came to check his vitals, then continued writing after she left. By the time Rachel was wheeled in for a brief visit, the notebook contained the beginnings of an idea that might just salvage everything. "What are you working on so intently?" Rachel asked, noticing his focused expression. Jamal glanced up, a small smile forming despite his split lip. "A plan, Gran. If Ms. Prescott won't stay for her own reasons, maybe she'll stay for ours." Rachel leaned forward in her wheelchair, her eyes gleaming with interest. "Tell me." As Jamal explained his thoughts, Rachel's expression shifted from curiosity to approval. "You always did have a gift for bringing people together," she said, squeezing his hand. "Even as a little boy, you'd be the one making peace when the neighbor kids fought. We need to show her that some of us, enough of us, want to work together, not just take advantage," Jamal continued. "The community center might be perfect for a meeting." "The old one on Maple? That place has been abandoned for years." "Exactly. If we can come together to clean it up for just one meeting, it proves something, doesn't it?" 2 days later, Jamal was discharged from the hospital with instructions to rest, instructions he had no intention of following. As Eleanor's driver took him back to the hotel where he'd been staying, Jamal was already on his phone, the first call connecting to Mrs. Martinez. "The community center?" she repeated after he explained his idea. "Hijo, that place is a disaster. No electricity, broken windows, probably rats." "That's the point," Jamal insisted. "If we can fix it up enough for one meeting, it shows we're serious, that we can work together when it matters." There was a pause on the line. "When do we start?" By that afternoon, Jamal had handwritten a dozen invitations on the back of takeout menus from the hotel room service. With the help of Eleanor's driver, who had been assigned to assist him, he delivered them to mailboxes throughout his building. Each note was simple but direct. "Our neighborhood has a chance for real change. Meeting at the old community center, Friday at 7 p.m. If you care about our future, please come. Jamal Johnson." The next morning, Jamal visited his school, still bearing the visible marks of his assault. Students stared as he walked the halls, conversations halting as he passed. He ignored the whispers, making his way directly to Mrs. Carvalho's classroom. His Portuguese teacher looked up from her desk, her eyes widening at the sight of him. "Jamal, should you be up and about already?" "I need your help, Mrs. Carvalho," he said, sliding one of his makeshift invitations across her desk. "I'm trying to organize a community meeting about Ms. Prescott's clinic project." Mrs. Carvalho read the invitation, her expression thoughtful. "This is a wonderful idea, But wouldn't the school auditorium be more suitable? Jamal shook his head. It needs to be neutral ground. And honestly, I want to see who's willing to put in the work. The center needs cleaning, repairs. A test of commitment. Mrs. Carvalho nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. Smart. Count me in. I can bring refreshments and help spread the word among the faculty. As Jamal turned to leave, a familiar voice stopped him in the hallway. Jamal, wait. Marcus stood a few feet away, his usual confidence replaced by uncomfortable shifting. The bruises on his knuckles matched the ones on Jamal's face. What do you want? Jamal asked, tension coiling in his shoulders. Marcus swallowed hard. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I was stupid and jealous, and I took it out on you. Jamal studied him silently, weighing the sincerity in his former attacker's eyes. They suspended me, Marcus continued when Jamal didn't respond. Might expel me. Deserved, I guess. Why'd you do it? Jamal finally asked, the question that had been haunting him since the attack. Marcus looked down at his shoes. My mom's got the same thing as your gran. Been sick for years. We never got help. No fancy doctors, no billionaires swooping in. He looked up, shame evident in his expression. I was mad it was you and not us. Stupid reason to hurt someone. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. Then Jamal pulled out another of his invitations and held it out. Friday at 7. The old community center needs cleaning before the meeting. If you mean what you say, show up at 4 and help. Marcus took the paper, surprise replacing the shame on his face. You'd let me help? After what I did? This isn't about me and you, Jamal replied. It's about all of us. My gran needs that clinic. So does your mom. So do a lot of people around here. That afternoon, Jamal made his most important call to Eleanor. A community meeting? She repeated, sounding skeptical over the phone line. Yes, at the old center on Maple. I'm inviting everyone, neighbors, teachers, even the kids who... He paused. Who had issues with me. Jamal, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but why should I believe this meeting will be any different? The situation seems quite volatile. Jamal took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. Because this time, it's not about you coming to us. It's about us coming together first, then inviting you. The people who show up will be there because they care about the future, not just because there's money or cameras. There was a long pause on the line. Our neighborhood has problems, Jamal continued into the silence. Big ones. But we also have good people who want better. They just need a chance to show it. Friday at 7, Eleanor finally agreed. I'll be there. The next 2 days passed in a blur of activity. By Thursday afternoon, word had spread throughout the neighborhood about the community meeting. Mrs. Martinez organized a group of seniors to handle food. Mrs. Carvalho recruited several teachers to help with setup. To Jamal's surprise, Marcus showed up at the community center on Thursday evening with 4 friends, all carrying cleaning supplies. My mom's coming tomorrow, he said simply as they worked together to clear years of debris from the main room. Said she wants to thank you and Ms. Prescott personally. By Friday afternoon, the transformation was remarkable. The community center was still shabby, with its peeling paint and mismatched chairs salvaged from various sources, but it was clean. Broken windows had been covered with plastic sheeting, the floor swept and mopped, and folding tables arranged in a semicircle. Someone had even strung up Christmas lights along the walls, giving the space a warm glow that countered the approaching evening darkness. As 7 o'clock neared, Jamal stood nervously by the entrance, watching as people began to arrive. There were familiar faces: Mrs. Martinez, the building superintendent, his science teacher, and many he only vaguely recognized from around the neighborhood. Some looked curious, others skeptical, but all had made the effort to come. A minor commotion erupted when Councilman Diaz arrived with 2 assistants, immediately trying to position himself front and center. "Jamal, my boy," he boomed, clapping Jamal on the shoulder with practiced political precision. "I'm so pleased to see this initiative. Of course, my office has always prioritized community engagement in this district." "Thank you for coming, Councilman," Jamal interrupted politely but firmly. "There are seats available in the back row." The politician's smile faltered slightly, but before he could respond, Rachel arrived in her wheelchair, pushed by Dr. Winters, who had granted her a brief leave from the hospital for the meeting. The genuine affection with which neighbors greeted her provided Jamal the opportunity to direct the councilman away from the entrance. As 7 o'clock struck, the old building was nearly full. At least 60 people had squeezed into the space. Jamal scanned the crowd anxiously, but there was no sign of Eleanor. Had she changed her mind? Just as murmurs of impatience began to circulate, a subtle shift in the atmosphere alerted Jamal to a presence at the back door. Eleanor had arrived, dressed not in her usual business attire but in simple slacks and a sweater. She slipped in quietly, taking a seat in the far corner, nodding for Jamal to proceed without acknowledging her presence. The room gradually quieted as Jamal made his way to the front. His legs trembled beneath him as he faced the crowd, but his resolve remained steady. This was their one chance to save not just the clinic project, but perhaps to begin healing the fractures in their community that had existed long before Eleanor Prescott arrived. With shaking legs but determined heart, Jamal stepped onto the small improvised stage and faced the divided crowd of curious, skeptical, and hopeful neighbors, knowing that the next words he spoke could determine the future of his entire community. The silence in the community center was palpable as Jamal stood before the gathered residents. His mouth felt dry, and the microphone, a simple karaoke set borrowed from Mrs. Carvalho, seemed to weigh 100 pounds in his trembling hands. Faces stared back at him, some friendly, others skeptical, a few openly hostile. In the back corner, Eleanor sat quietly, her presence known but deliberately understated. Jamal's voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Thank you all for coming tonight." The words came out shaky at first, but as he continued, his voice found strength and conviction. "Most of you know me. I'm Jamal Johnson. I live in Building C with my grandmother, Rachel." He gestured toward Rachel in her wheelchair near the front, who nodded encouragingly. 3 days ago, I got beat up because people thought I was trying to get rich off Ms. Prescott." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Near the middle, Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Before that, our apartment was broken into by reporters. Before that, our electricity was cut off because we couldn't pay the bill. And before that..." Jamal paused, gathering courage. "Before that, I helped an elderly woman carry her groceries in the rain." He stepped away from the microphone, choosing instead to project his voice naturally, making the conversation more intimate. "I didn't know she was Eleanor Prescott. I didn't know she was a billionaire. I just saw someone who needed help, and I helped. The same way Mrs. Martinez helped us when Gran couldn't breathe after the power went out. The same way Mr. Diaz fixed our sink last year and wouldn't take payment." Jamal scanned the room, making eye contact with various neighbors. "But I have a question for everyone here." His voice grew stronger, the nervousness replaced by genuine emotion. "Where was all this attention before Ms. Prescott showed up? How many of you knew my grandmother couldn't breathe right for the past 3 years?" The uncomfortable silence that followed was answer enough. "How many knew that Damon Williams in Building A has such bad asthma he's missed half the school year? Or that Mr. Washington has been saving for 2 years to see a specialist his insurance won't cover?" Near the back, Mr. Washington, the school security guard, nodded grimly, his oxygen tank beside his chair. "I'm not saying this to make anyone feel bad," Jamal continued. "I'm saying it because we've always had problems in this neighborhood. Real problems that needed fixing long before any billionaire showed up." Councilman Diaz stood up, smoothing his tie. "Young man, if I may interject, my office has consistently advocated for. With all due respect, Councilman, Jamal interrupted firmly. This isn't about politics right now. This is about our community and what we actually need. A smattering of applause followed this statement, and Diaz reluctantly returned to his seat. Jamal took a deep breath, momentarily closing his eyes as the memory of helping Eleanor in the rain flashed through his mind. The weight of the grocery bags, the cold rain soaking through his clothes, the simple human connection of one person helping another. That night in the rain, he continued, his voice softer now. I didn't help Ms. Prescott because I wanted something from her. I helped because that's what people should do for each other. That's what community means. He pointed toward his bruised face. This happened because some people thought I was trying to get special treatment. But the truth is, there shouldn't be anything special about getting the medical care you need. There shouldn't be anything special about having a clinic in our neighborhood where our families can get help. From her corner, Eleanor watched with growing admiration as this 12-year-old boy articulated what many adults in the room couldn't. Ms. Prescott came here to build a clinic, something we've needed for years. And how did we react? Some of us saw dollar signs. Some saw photo opportunities. Jamal's gaze briefly met Councilman Diaz's. And some saw a chance to hurt others out of jealousy. Marcus stood up unexpectedly, his tall frame drawing all eyes. He's right, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I beat him up because I was jealous. My mom's been sick for years and nobody helped us. So when Jamal got help, I hated him for it. He looked directly at Jamal. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. The raw honesty of the admission sent another wave of murmurs through the crowd. Jamal nodded in acknowledgement before continuing. The clinic Ms. Prescott wants to build wouldn't just be for me and my grandmother. It would be for Marcus's mom, too. For Mr. Washington, for Damon. For everyone here who's ever had to choose between medicine and food, or who's had to take 3 buses to get to a doctor's appointment. Mrs. Carvalho rose from her seat, her usual classroom authority evident in her posture. If I may add something, she said. I've been teaching at Westside Middle for 15 years. In that time, I've watched countless students miss school due to preventable health issues. A community clinic would change lives in ways we can't even measure. Encouraged by these interventions, others began to speak up. Mr. Washington described his struggle with COPD without proper medical support. A young mother detailed her nightmarish experience trying to get emergency care for her toddler's asthma attack. Marcus's mother explained the financial ruin her respiratory condition had caused their family. As the testimonials continued, the mood in the room shifted. The divisiveness that had characterized the community's response to Eleanor's arrival began to dissolve, replaced by a growing consensus about their shared needs. This is what I wanted us all to see, Jamal said when the personal stories subsided. These problems weren't created by Ms. Prescott coming here, and they won't be solved if she leaves. They're our problems, and we need to work together to fix them. He gestured toward the makeshift stage he stood on. Look at what we did with this place in just 2 days. It was abandoned, filthy, falling apart. Now it's clean enough for all of us to sit in. Imagine what we could do with actual resources and support. The room had grown noticeably warmer as bodies packed the space, and someone had opened the side door to let in fresh air. Through this opening, more residents continued to arrive, crowding against the walls when all the seats were taken. Ms. Prescott is here tonight, Jamal finally acknowledged, nodding toward Eleanor in the back. A ripple of surprise moved through those who hadn't noticed her quiet presence. She's been listening to everything we've said, and I think she deserves to hear directly from us, not from reporters or politicians or people trying to get something for themselves, about what this community really needs. He stepped back, extending his hand toward Eleanor in invitation. After a moment's hesitation, she rose and made her way to the front of the room. The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some straightened respectfully. Others watched with wary eyes. "Thank you, Jamal," Eleanor began, her voice clear and direct. "When I first visited your neighborhood, I wanted to understand its needs firsthand, without the filters that typically surround someone in my position. What I found was a community with significant challenges, yes, but also with remarkable resilience." She looked around the room, taking in the faces before her. "I've built clinics and research centers across the country, but I've never encountered the kind of honest dialogue I'm hearing tonight. Most communities show me what they think I want to see. You're showing me who you really are, both the struggles and the strengths." Eleanor's gaze settled on Jamal's bruised face. "Recent events made me question whether my presence here was doing more harm than good. I considered withdrawing the project entirely." A murmur of dismay rippled through the audience. "But Jamal convinced me to come tonight to hear directly from you. And what I've heard reinforces my initial assessment. This community not only needs the clinic we planned, it deserves an even more comprehensive approach." She pulled a small tablet from her bag and tapped the screen. A projector that Mrs. Carvalho had set up flickered to life, displaying architectural plans on the wall behind her. "This was our original design for the clinic," Eleanor explained, showing a modern one-story building. "But after what I've learned these past few days, I'm proposing something more ambitious." With another tap, the image changed to show a larger facility with multiple wings. "A comprehensive community health center," she continued, "with specialized respiratory care, yes, but also primary care services, mental health support, a pharmacy with reduced-cost medications, and preventative care programs." The room erupted in excited conversation. Eleanor waited for it to subside before continuing. "Additionally, I'm prepared to establish a training program for community members interested in healthcare careers. This center shouldn't just serve the community. It should be staffed by it whenever possible." As the implications of her expanded vision sank in, the atmosphere in the room transformed. Where there had been division, a tentative unity began to form. Where there had been skepticism, cautious hope emerged. Jamal watched as neighbors who had barely acknowledged each other before began discussing possibilities, forming impromptu committees, and offering skills and resources. Mrs. Martinez volunteered to coordinate elderly outreach. Marcus and his friends proposed a youth advisory council. Mrs. Carvalho offered to liaise with the school system. Eleanor observed this spontaneous organization with quiet satisfaction, occasionally answering questions, but largely allowing the community to take ownership of the process. When Councilman Diaz attempted to position himself as the project's political champion, he found himself gently but firmly redirected by the newly energized residents. As the meeting drew to a close after nearly 3 hours of productive discussion, Eleanor and Jamal stood side by side, watching the community break into working groups. "You did this," Eleanor said softly. "Not my money, not my foundation, you." Jamal shook his head. "We did it, all of us." The dwindling crowd began to disperse, many stopping to speak with Jamal or Eleanor before leaving. Among them, a small group of local business owners slipped out early, their expressions distinctly displeased with the evening's outcome. While the meeting dispersed with a renewed sense of hope, no one noticed the shadowy figure photographing every interaction between Jamal and Eleanor, nor heard the man mutter into his cell phone, "I found the perfect angle to destroy her project." Jamal's alarm jolted him awake at 6:30 a.m. For a moment, he forgot everything: the assault, Eleanor, the community meeting, and reached for his phone with the muscle memory of any ordinary school day. Then the pain in his jaw reminded him that nothing was ordinary anymore. He swung his legs out of bed in the guest room of Eleanor's hotel suite, still marveling at the plush carpet beneath his feet. His grandmother was staying in a medical recovery room down the hall, her condition improving daily under Dr. Winter's care. The past week since the community meeting had been a whirlwind of activity. Eleanor's expanded plans for the community health center had generated genuine excitement throughout the neighborhood. Working groups had formed spontaneously, meeting in living rooms and at the refurbished community center to discuss everything from service priorities to building design. Jamal dressed quickly, choosing the school uniform that Eleanor's assistant had collected from his apartment. The bruising on his face had faded to a yellowish hue, less shocking than the initial purple, but still noticeable. He checked his phone. 3 missed calls from Mrs. Martinez and several text messages from classmates asking about the latest community meeting. As he scrolled through the notifications, a news alert caught his eye. Local heroes or clever scammers. The truth behind the billionaire and the boy. His stomach knotted as he tapped the link. The article was from a local tabloid, not a reputable source, but the headline was accompanied by a photo of him helping Eleanor during the rainstorm, a photo that couldn't possibly exist unless someone had been following them. The article suggested that Jamal and Rachel had orchestrated the entire encounter, claiming anonymous sources confirmed they had researched Eleanor's movements and deliberately intercepted her. Ridiculous, Jamal muttered, closing the article. No one would believe such obvious lies. But when he arrived at school an hour later, he realized how wrong he was. Copies of the tabloid were everywhere, passed between students with whispered commentary. As Jamal walked through the halls, conversations halted, and stares followed him. Outside his locker, someone had taped a photocopy of the article with the word "faker" scrawled across his picture in red marker. "Don't let them get to you," came a voice from behind. Marcus stood there, his expression grim. People are saying stupid stuff, but some of us know better. "Who's spreading this?" Jamal asked, ripping the paper from his locker. "Darren Miller's dad owns that pharmacy on Lexington, the one charging triple for asthma inhalers. He's been telling everyone your grandma isn't even sick." Jamal felt his face flush with anger. That's why they covered the community meeting so negatively in the paper. They don't want the clinic because it'll hurt their business. Exactly, Marcus confirmed. And Councilman Diaz is apparently tight with the pharmacy owners. My mom heard he's worried about losing campaign contributions if he supports the clinic. The morning only grew worse. In history class, Mr. Peterson asked Jamal point blank about the article, presenting it as a current events discussion. The thinly veiled accusation forced Jamal to defend himself before his peers, many of whom were clearly uncertain what to believe. "I didn't even know who Eleanor Prescott was until after I helped her," Jamal insisted, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "I just saw an old lady struggling with groceries in the rain." "But you must admit," Mr. Peterson pressed, "the timing seems remarkably convenient. Your grandmother needed expensive medical care, and suddenly one of the world's wealthiest women appears in your neighborhood." Before Jamal could respond, the classroom door opened, and Mrs. Carvalho entered unexpectedly. "Mr. Peterson, I need to borrow Jamal for a moment," she said firmly, her expression leaving no room for argument. In the hallway, she handed Jamal her phone. "Have you seen this?" The screen displayed a different article, this one from the city's major newspaper. Prescott Foundation under scrutiny. Investors question emotional investment in West Side project. According to the article, Eleanor's investors were expressing concern about her personal involvement with Jamal and his grandmother, suggesting it compromised her judgment regarding the $30 million community health center investment. "They're attacking from all sides," Mrs. Carvalho said quietly. "The pharmacy owners, Councilman Diaz, even some of Eleanor's own board members. They're trying to discredit both of you." Jamal's phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. "Need to speak with you. Car waiting outside school at lunch." The morning dragged on interminably. In each class, Jamal felt the weight of suspicious glances. Some students who had enthusiastically supported him at the community meeting now kept their distance, unwilling to associate with the subject of such controversy. At lunch, He slipped out a side door to find Eleanor's sleek black car waiting. Inside, Eleanor looked exhausted, her usual composure frayed around the edges. "They're targeting your grandmother now," she said without preamble, showing him another tabloid headline. "Grandmother's miracle recovery raises questions about severity of illness." "That's insane," Jamal protested. "Anyone who's seen Gran knows how sick she's been. Dr. Winters has all her medical records." "Facts don't matter in a smear campaign," Eleanor said grimly. "It's about creating doubt. My PR team says there's a coordinated effort to discredit both of us. The pharmaceutical lobby, local business interests, even some of my competitors, they all have reasons to want this project to fail." Jamal stared out the window at his school, feeling a strange detachment from the ordinary life he'd led just a week ago. "What do we do?" "We fight back with truth," Eleanor replied. "I've called a press conference for tomorrow. Dr. Winters will present your grandmother's medical case with her permission. We'll address these accusations head on." When Jamal returned to the hotel that evening, he found his grandmother sitting up in bed, a newspaper clutched in her trembling hands. Her face was flushed with anger. "They're saying I faked being sick," Rachel said, her voice quivering. "After all these years of struggling to breathe, of counting pennies for medicine, they dare to say I faked it for money?" Jamal sat beside her, gently taking the paper and setting it aside. "We know the truth, Gran. So do the doctors. We're going to fight this." "I never asked for any of this," Rachel said softly. "All these years, I've taken care of myself, taken care of you. Never asked for handouts. And now they're making me sound like some kind of con artist." The next morning, Jamal woke to find hateful messages scrawled on the door of their hotel suite. "Go back to your own neighborhood and scammers." Hotel security was reviewing surveillance footage, but the culprits had concealed their faces. At school, the situation deteriorated further. As Jamal entered the building, a group of students, led by Darren Miller, the pharmacy owner's son, blocked his path. "My dad says your grandmother was miraculously cured as soon as the billionaire showed up," Darren sneered. "Funny how that works, isn't it?" "Your dad charges people 4 times what those medications cost," Jamal retorted. "Maybe that's why he's so worried about the clinic opening." Darren's face reddened. "You think you're so special now? You're nothing. Just a kid from the projects who got lucky." "Leave him alone," Marcus said, stepping up beside Jamal. "We all know your dad's been spreading lies because he's scared of losing business." The confrontation might have ended there if Darren hadn't shoved Jamal, sending him stumbling backward into the lockers. Unlike the previous assault, this time Jamal didn't hesitate. He pushed back, his frustration and anger boiling over. Within seconds, a crowd had gathered, chanting, "Fight! Fight!" As Jamal and Darren grappled, teachers rushed to separate them, but not before the principal witnessed Jamal landing a solid punch to Darren's stomach. Both boys were escorted to the principal's office, where Mr. Torres looked at Jamal with disappointment. "I expected better from you, Jamal, especially after all the special attention you've been receiving." "He attacked me first," Jamal protested. "Everyone saw it." "Nevertheless, fighting is against school policy. I'm suspending you both for 3 days." The news of Jamal's suspension spread quickly. By afternoon, it had reached Eleanor, who was in a meeting with her foundation board when her assistant delivered the message. Several board members exchanged knowing glances. "This is exactly what we were concerned about," one of them said. "The boy's involvement has become a liability. These complications here were predictable." Eleanor bristled. Jamal was defending himself against bullying directly related to the misinformation being spread about him and his grandmother. "The optics are problematic regardless," another board member insisted. "We need to distance the foundation from this personal connection before it jeopardizes more than just this project." When Eleanor met with Jamal that evening, She found him sitting by his grandmother's bedside, his expression defeated. "I messed up," he admitted. "I shouldn't have fought back." "You were protecting yourself," Eleanor said gently. "But it's given them more ammunition, hasn't it?" Jamal looked up at her, his young face showing a wisdom beyond his years. "I saw the news. They're saying I'm violent now, that you've allied yourself with a troubled kid from the projects." Eleanor didn't deny it. "My board is concerned. Some investors are threatening to withdraw support from other foundation projects if we proceed here." "So it's over?" Rachel asked from her bed. "All this pain and disruption for nothing?" "No," Eleanor said firmly. "I've decided to fund the clinic personally if necessary, but I need to be strategic about how we proceed." As they discussed next steps, Jamal's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Check your email. I found something you need to see." The email contained surveillance footage from a coffee shop near the school, showing the pharmacy owner meeting with Councilman Diaz and the editor of the tabloid that had published the first smear article. The audio was faint, but clear enough to hear them discussing taking down the Prescott project and discrediting the kid and his grandmother. "If querem uma história, vamos dar a eles uma história de verdade," Eleanor said, with a determined gleam in her eyes, while showing Jamal the documents that proved who were the real manipulators in the situation, and what they had to lose when the truth came to light. Eleanor's eyes sparkled with determination as she studied the surveillance footage on Jamal's phone. The grainy video clearly showed Councilman Diaz, pharmacy owner Miller, and tabloid editor Samuels huddled together at a corner table, their hushed voices barely audible, but unmistakably conspiratorial. "This is exactly what we needed," she said, her voice steady with newfound resolve. "Evidence of coordination between the parties trying to undermine us." Jamal leaned closer, watching as the men on screen passed documents between them. "They've been planning this all along," he murmured, "ever since they found out about the clinic." "Of course they have," Rachel said from her hospital bed, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "The clinic threatens their power. Miller's pharmacy has been price gouging our neighborhood for years because we have no alternatives." Eleanor was already on her phone, speaking rapidly to someone Jamal assumed was her lawyer. "Yes, I need a press conference set up. Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. sharp, and make sure every major news outlet in the city is there." She paused, listening. "No, I'm not waiting. This ends now." The following morning dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the storm that had first brought Jamal and Eleanor together. The press conference was arranged in the lobby of Eleanor's hotel, transformed overnight into a formal space with a podium, proper lighting, and seating for journalists. Jamal stood nervously backstage, tugging at the collar of the crisp button-down shirt Eleanor's assistant had provided. His grandmother sat beside him in her wheelchair, looking more dignified than he'd ever seen her in a simple but elegant blouse. "You don't have to speak if you don't want to," Eleanor assured them both. "Your presence is enough." But Rachel shook her head firmly. "I've been silent too long while people like Miller charge me 4 times what my medicine should cost. I'm speaking today." Dr. Winters arrived moments later, carrying a thick folder of medical records. "These document Rachel's condition over the past 5 years," he explained, "including her emergency room visits, prescription history, and deteriorating lung function tests, irrefutable evidence of her chronic condition." As the lobby filled with reporters and cameras, Jamal peeked through the curtain. To his surprise, he spotted several familiar faces from the neighborhood: Mrs. Martinez, Marcus and his mother, Mrs. Carvalho, and at least a dozen others from the community meeting. "You ready?" Eleanor asked, her hand gentle on his shoulder. Jamal nodded, drawing strength from the unexpected community support. Eleanor stepped to the podium first, her posture regal despite the strain of recent days. The cameras flashed, and the room fell silent. "Good morning," she began, her voice clear and commanding. "I've called this press conference to address a coordinated smear campaign against myself the Prescott Foundation, and most disgracefully, against a 12-year-old boy and his grandmother. She gestured to a large screen behind her, where the surveillance video began to play. The audience murmured as the conspiracy between Councilman Diaz-Miller and the tabloid editor unfolded before them. What you're witnessing is a deliberate attempt to derail a much-needed community health center by individuals who profit from the current lack of accessible health care in the West Side neighborhood. Eleanor methodically presented the evidence, financial records showing the inflated prices at Miller's Pharmacy, documentation of Councilman Diaz receiving campaign contributions from pharmaceutical interests, and proof that the tabloid had been paid to run the defamatory articles. Now, Eleanor continued, I'd like to introduce you to the real Rachel Johnson, not the fabrication you've read about in certain publications. Rachel wheeled herself forward, Dr. Winters at her side. With quiet dignity, she told her story, the years of struggling to breathe, the impossible choices between medication and utilities, the constant fear that her condition would worsen beyond help. Dr. Winters followed with a clinical presentation of her medical history, systematically dismantling the accusations that she had exaggerated her illness. Throughout Rachel's testimony, Jamal noticed Miller shifting uncomfortably in his seat near the back of the room. Councilman Diaz was conspicuously absent. When it was Jamal's turn to speak, he approached the podium with trepidation, acutely aware of the cameras trained on his face. But as he began to tell his story, from the rainy night encounter to the community meeting, his voice grew stronger. I never asked Ms. Prescott for anything that night, he said clearly. I just helped someone who needed help. Everything that came after was because she saw a need in our community that's been ignored for years. Jamal described the assault he'd suffered, the invasion of his home, and the bullying at school, all because he'd shown kindness to a stranger. The people attacking us aren't worried about the truth, he concluded. They're worried about losing money and power if our community finally gets the health care we deserve. As the press conference concluded, the reporters surged forward with questions. Eleanor fielded them calmly, redirecting the narrative that had been hijacked by the smear campaign. The tide was turning. Later that afternoon, as they watched the news coverage in Eleanor's suite, the first positive headlines in days appeared. Prescott exposes conspiracy against community health center, and local business owner and politician implicated in smear campaign. This is just the beginning, Eleanor warned. They won't give up easily. She was right. The next morning, Miller's Pharmacy Association announced a lawsuit against the Prescott Foundation, claiming defamation and business interference. Councilman Diaz held his own press conference, portraying himself as a victim of Eleanor's billion-dollar bullying. But something else was happening too. The community was rallying. When Jamal returned to school after his suspension, he was greeted not with hostility, but with support. Students who had previously avoided him now approached with words of encouragement. Even Darren Miller was subdued, his father's reputation tarnished by the exposed conspiracy. Mrs. Carvalho organized a letter-writing campaign among the students, sending hundreds of personal stories about healthcare challenges to local officials. Marcus and his friends created a social media movement, where West Side Deserves Health, that quickly gained traction across the city. 2 weeks after the press conference, Eleanor received the news they'd been waiting for. The city council had approved the permit for the community health center, overriding Councilman Diaz's objections in a 7-2 vote. Construction could begin immediately. The groundbreaking ceremony took place on a sunny Saturday morning. The vacant lot where the clinic would stand had been cleared and decorated with balloons and banners. A temporary stage held chairs for Eleanor, Jamal, Rachel, now strong enough to attend public events, and various community representatives. As Eleanor approached the podium to make the official announcement, she unexpectedly gestured for Jamal to join her. This project began because of one simple act of kindness, she told the gathered crowd, her arm around Jamal's shoulders. and it will continue through the combined efforts of an entire community. The Prescott Foundation isn't just building a clinic here, we're investing in a partnership with all of you. The construction timeline was aggressive, 6 months from groundbreaking to opening. Eleanor assembled a community advisory board to provide input on services and design, with Rachel appointed as honorary chairperson. Jamal, despite his young age, was included in these meetings, his perspective valued alongside the adults. As the weeks passed, the steel framework of the building rose against the sky, a tangible symbol of progress. Workers from the neighborhood were hired whenever possible, providing much-needed employment alongside healthcare solutions. Rachel's health continued to improve under Dr. Winter's care. By the 3-month mark of construction, she was able to reduce her oxygen support during the day and move around with greater independence. The experimental medication that had once seemed an impossible dream was now part of her regular treatment plan. Jamal found a new balance in his life. With Rachel's health stabilizing and their financial worries eased by Eleanor's support, he returned his focus to school. His grades, which had suffered during the crisis, began to improve. Mrs. Carvalho suggested he join the science club, where his interest in medicine could be nurtured. "You know," she told him one afternoon as they watched the clinic's walls being erected, "you could be working there someday as Dr. Johnson." The idea took root in Jamal's mind. He began spending time with Dr. Winters, asking questions about medical school and what it would take to become a pulmonologist like him. One day, as they toured the construction site together, Eleanor mentioned casually, "The foundation has a scholarship program for students interested in healthcare careers. You might consider applying when the time comes." 5 months into the project, the exterior of the building was complete, a modern, welcoming structure with large windows and a design that complemented rather than dominated the neighborhood. Interior work progressed rapidly, with state-of-the-art medical equipment being installed under Dr. Winter's supervision. In the final month before the grand opening, Eleanor expanded the project yet again, adding a research wing focused on respiratory diseases. "In memory of Michael," she explained to Jamal and Rachel, "and in honor of everyone like Rachel who struggled without adequate treatment options." The day before the official opening, Eleanor gave Jamal and Rachel a private tour of the completed facility. As they moved through the gleaming hallways, Rachel marveled at the transformation from concept to reality. "I never thought I'd see something like this in our neighborhood," she admitted, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. The clinic was more impressive than any of them had imagined at the beginning. A comprehensive healthcare center with primary care services, specialized respiratory treatment, mental health support, a research wing, a pharmacy with income-based pricing, and community education spaces. As they concluded the tour in the bright, welcoming lobby, Eleanor handed Jamal an envelope with his name embossed in gold. "What's this?" he asked, turning the heavy envelope in his hands. "Open it tomorrow," Eleanor said with a mysterious smile. "At the ceremony." Jamal placed the envelope carefully in his backpack, curious but respecting Eleanor's request. As they left the building, they paused to admire the sign above the entrance. Prescott, Johnson Community Health Center. "Tomorrow is going to be quite special," Eleanor said, glancing at the envelope in Jamal's backpack. "I think you'll find that 6 months can change a life in ways you never expected." 6 months had passed like the blink of an eye, and when Jamal woke up on the morning of the inauguration, he found on his bed a golden envelope with the official invitation from Eleanor and a handwritten note that said, "Prepare yourself for a surprise that will change your life forever." The morning sunlight streamed through Jamal's bedroom window, casting a golden glow across the envelope in his hands. He traced the embossed letters of his name with his fingertip, the weight of it substantial against his palm. Eleanor's handwritten note lay beside it on his bed. "Prepare yourself for a surprise that will change your life forever." His heart raced with anticipation and a touch of nervousness as he carefully set the unopened envelope on his dresser. Today was no ordinary day. It marked 6 months since that rainy evening when he'd helped an elderly woman with her groceries, unaware that single act of kindness would transform his entire community. "Jamal," Rachel called from the living room of their new apartment. Eleanor had arranged for them to move into a renovated building closer to the clinic, with proper ventilation systems and no mold issues to aggravate Rachel's condition. "Are you almost ready? The car will be here in 20 minutes. "Coming, Gran," he replied, adjusting his tie in the mirror. The suit, his first ever, had been delivered yesterday. The navy blue fabric felt strange against his skin, formal in a way that made him seem older than his 12 years. In the living room, Rachel sat in an armchair, no longer tethered to an oxygen tank. Her breathing was steady and strong, her complexion healthy. She wore a simple but elegant dress in soft blue, her gray hair arranged neatly. "Look at you," she said, smiling broadly as Jamal entered. "So handsome. Like a young doctor already." Jamal ducked his head, embarrassed by the praise but pleased nonetheless. "You look beautiful, Gran." "Eleanor sent a hairdresser this morning," Rachel confessed with a small laugh. "Can you imagine? In all my 67 years, I never had someone come to my home just to do my hair." The buzzer announced their driver's arrival. As they descended in the elevator, Jamal clutched the golden envelope in his jacket pocket, resisting the urge to open it before the ceremony. The drive to the clinic was short but memorable. Streets that had once been littered with trash were now clean. The abandoned buildings that had blighted the neighborhood were being renovated. Signs of renewal were everywhere, a direct result of Eleanor's investment extending beyond just the healthcare facility. "It's like a different place," Rachel murmured, gazing out the window. As they approached the clinic, Jamal gasped at the transformation. The entrance was decorated with blue and white ribbons. A massive crowd already gathered in the plaza before it. News vans lined the street, cameras capturing the historic moment for the neighborhood. Their car pulled around to a private entrance where Eleanor waited, elegant in a simple cream suit. Her face lit up at the sight of them. "There they are," she said warmly, embracing Rachel and then Jamal, "the guests of honor." "There must be hundreds of people out there," Jamal said, his voice betraying his nervousness. Eleanor squeezed his shoulder reassuringly. "And they're all here because of what we started together. Are you ready?" Jamal nodded, one hand still touching the envelope in his pocket. "Not yet," Eleanor said, noticing the gesture. "The envelope is for later. Trust me." They entered through the staff area, giving Jamal a chance to see the clinic coming to life, doctors and nurses preparing for the first patients who would be seen tomorrow, equipment being tested one final time, the pharmacy stocked and ready. Dr. Winters greeted them in the hallway, shaking Jamal's hand with professional courtesy. "Quite a turnout," he observed. "The entire medical community is watching this opening. What you've helped create here will become a model for other underserved areas." As they approached the lobby, the sounds of the crowd filtered through. Hundreds of voices, music playing, an atmosphere of celebration rather than the usual tension that characterized public gatherings in their neighborhood. Eleanor led them to a staging area just behind the ceremonial ribbons stretched across the main entrance. Through a gap in the curtains, Jamal could see the front rows filled with familiar faces. Mrs. Martinez, Marcus and his mother, Mrs. Carvalho, and other teachers, neighbors who had attended that first community meeting, and even some former skeptics who had eventually joined the cause. 2 minutes, a coordinator informed them, adjusting the microphones on the small stage. "Are you nervous?" Jamal asked Eleanor, surprised to see even the composed billionaire taking deep breaths. "Every time," she admitted, "but today is special. Today we get to show the world what happens when we trust each other and work together, despite our differences." The coordinator signaled it was time. Eleanor stepped out first, to thunderous applause, followed by Rachel in her wheelchair, insisted upon by Dr. Winters for the lengthy ceremony, though she could walk short distances now. And finally, Jamal. The bright morning sun momentarily blinded him as he emerged, the applause washing over him like a wave. He blinked, taking in the sea of faces. So many people from his community gathered together, not in crisis or protest, but in celebration. Eleanor approached the microphone, waiting for the applause to subside. 6 months ago, she began, a chance encounter in the rain changed 2 lives, mine and Jamal Johnson's. What began as a simple act of kindness evolved into something none of us could have predicted, a partnership that would transform an entire community. She gestured to the gleaming building behind them. The Prescott Johnson Community Health Center is more than just a medical facility. It represents what happens when we see past our differences and recognize our shared humanity. When we acknowledge that access to quality health care isn't a privilege, it's a right. Eleanor continued, detailing the services the center would provide, from specialized respiratory care to preventative medicine, mental health services to community health education. But perhaps most importantly, she added, this center belongs to you. Staffed wherever possible by members of this community, governed with input from local advisory boards, designed to meet the specific needs you identified. Rachel spoke next, her voice stronger than Jamal had heard it in years. She shared her personal journey, the struggles before, the transformation after receiving proper care, and her hope that no one else would have to make the impossible choices she once faced between medicine and basic necessities. When it was Jamal's turn, he approached the microphone with butterflies in his stomach. Looking out at the crowd, he spotted Marcus giving him an encouraging thumbs up. 6 months ago, Jamal began, unconsciously echoing Eleanor's opening. I was just a kid worried about his grandmother and an overdue electric bill. I never imagined that helping someone with their groceries would lead to all of this. He spoke from the heart about the journey, the initial kindness, the unexpected revelation of Eleanor's identity, the challenges they faced together, and the community that eventually rallied around them. What I learned through all of this, Jamal continued, gaining confidence with each word, is that change doesn't always start with grand gestures or important people. Sometimes it starts with one person helping another through a storm. The crowd responded with warm applause as Jamal, Rachel, and Eleanor moved to the ribbon stretched across the entrance. Together, they cut it to thunderous cheers, officially opening the clinic that would serve thousands in their community. As the formal ceremony concluded and guests began touring the facility, Eleanor drew Jamal aside to a quiet corner of the lobby. I think it's time for you to open that envelope, she said, her eyes twinkling with anticipation. With trembling fingers, Jamal removed the envelope from his pocket. He broke the seal and extracted a formal-looking document with the Prescott Foundation letterhead. As he read, his eyes widened. A full scholarship, he whispered, hardly daring to believe the words before him. All the way through medical school? Eleanor nodded, her expression warm with genuine affection. The Prescott Foundation is establishing the Michael Prescott Memorial Scholarship for promising students interested in medical careers. You, Jamal Johnson, are our first recipient. Tears welled in Jamal's eyes. College had always been a distant dream, medical school an impossibility. Now, suddenly, a clear path stretched before him. I don't know what to say, he managed, his voice thick with emotion. You don't have to say anything, Eleanor replied gently. Just promise you'll work hard and someday bring your knowledge back to help others the way you've been helped. The rest of the day passed in a blur of introductions, tours, and celebrations. The clinic buzzed with activity as community members explored the facility that would transform their access to health care. In the pharmacy, people marveled at medication prices that were a fraction of what Miller had charged. In the children's wing, parents enrolled kids with asthma in management programs that would keep them in school instead of emergency rooms. As afternoon faded into evening, the formal events gave way to a community celebration in the clinic's garden. Tables of food prepared by local restaurants lined the perimeter, and a small band played cheerful music. Children darted between adults, their laughter a soundtrack to the day's achievements. Jamal found himself beside Eleanor near a freshly turned patch of soil in the garden center. "One last item on today's agenda," she said, gesturing to a staff member who approached with a small tree sapling in a pot. "I thought we might plant this together, a symbol of how small beginnings can grow into something lasting and vital." Together, they knelt by the prepared soil. Jamal removed the sapling from its container, while Eleanor began digging with a small trowel. Rachel watched from nearby, surrounded by neighbors who had become friends through their shared journey. "My grandmother used to say that true change takes root slowly," Eleanor commented as they carefully placed the young tree in the earth. "What matters is tending it faithfully, even when results aren't immediately visible." As they patted the soil around the tree's base, Jamal reflected on everything that had transpired since that rainy night: the challenges, the setbacks, the unexpected alliances, and ultimately, the transformation not just of his own life but of an entire community. "Sometimes carrying someone's weight for a moment can lift your own burden forever," he said thoughtfully, remembering Eleanor's grocery bags, so heavy in the rain, yet ultimately the lightest burden he'd ever carried. Years later, Dr. Jamal Johnson returned to the community health center that had transformed his neighborhood, walking beneath the shade of the now-grown tree at the garden's entrance, smiling at the small plaque beside it that simply read, "Kindness grows when shared. Eleanor and Jamal, 2024."